Welcome, everybody, to the Leadership Podcast. Sorry we've been away for a while, but it was the holidays, and we all decided that we needed to take some time to spend with our family and friends. But we're back. It's the new year. And as we're recording this, it is January 5th. And I say that because our discussion today is going to be about January 6th, 2021. And that may lead into some discussions about what might happen tomorrow on January 6th, 2025. But welcome back to the Leadership Podcast, where our disagreements inform your decisions. I'm Dion, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Brett and Will and Thea. And today, like I said, we're discussing January 6th, 2021, what happened and what is the import of it and what it means for today. And please like and subscribe, share us with your family and friends if you're enjoying what we're doing and what we're discussing. And let's go ahead and get started. So does anybody have any opening thoughts that they want to share?
Did you guys catch Hakeem Jeffries' speech the other day after the speaker was elected?
I did.
So Hakeem Jeffries is up there giving his speech, and he says, Donald Trump was elected, and all the Republicans gave the standing ovation. And he says, hey, thanks for that standing ovation. Donald Trump is the next president because there's no election deniers on our side of the aisle. And then all the Democrats stood up and gave him a standing ovation. I thought that was, obviously I thought it was funny, but January 6th, presumptively was about this, stop the steal, right? That the entire 2020 election was fake and stolen, and I would be interested to get your guys' thoughts on that, because regardless of, I have a feeling that we may all pretty much agree on some of the violence and stuff that actually happened on January 6th is bad. People shouldn't do that. But really, getting to the crux of do we really think that the 2020 election was stolen, or was this just an excuse to try to keep Trump in power?
What say you, Brett, since you're a resident Republican?
Sure. So in terms of the election being stolen, I don't necessarily know that that's the case. There is an odd discrepancy of about 20 million votes that doesn't line up with previous or following elections. Maybe we just had more people show up at the polls. Great. I would hope that would be the case. I hope more people would decide to show up and do their civic duty and vote. It's just sad to see if that is the case that they would drop off after the fact. But
honestly, Brett, you said there's a discrepancy of 20 million votes. I don't know what you mean. What do you mean by that?
So I'd have to look the source. I don't have it in my notes. But if you look at the amount of voters that participated in the elections, there is a delta of about 20 million people that voted in the 2020 election versus the 2016 or the 2024 election. There is a significant spike that's there. And so, again, I hope it would be the fact that people just decided to get off the couch and actually go vote. If that's not the case, that's probably why there are some people, and you have the conspiracy theory guys that are out there throwing things around, 20 million. It's a big number, right? So
yeah,
I'll have to pull the source for that.
There's a graphic that's been going around that it's basically like a bar chart, if I remember it correctly, that just shows that, quite a bit more people voted in 2020. And I take your point that that's a big number, but it was also COVID, and most states had very relaxed vote by mail, absentee ballot rules. And the only reason I aside from the fact that there were 60, however many court cases that went into this and everything else, if in my opinion, if there was something untoward going on with those 20 million votes, it wouldn't have been as close as it was. It's, 20 million more people voted, but it still ended up being a 50-50 split. Just tells me it was a lot easier to vote because of COVID and vote by mail.
And the thing that I have... Oh, sorry, Brett, what were you going to say?
I'll say, and that's kind of my point, is like, I'm hoping that's the case, that people just decided that to vote because it was available to them. But at the same time, and it's just one of those numbers that just kind of sticks out to you. It's like, and so now, do I think that the way people handled January 6th is right? No, absolutely not. You have to be peaceful about these things. You can't have violence initiated around these kind of things. And so, yeah, I mean, you talk about the peaceful transfer of power. That's what needed to happen. Now, if people had disagreements with it, then there should have been more formal inquiries into what happened, right? There should have been a process to be able to look into that. And I think that's what people were wanting. I just don't know as it was happening.
So I guess this is where I think my background as an attorney comes in, and I really have a hard time with the idea that that there was foul play other than vibes. I feel like people felt like something was wrong, therefore they've decided something must be afoot, because they, in their minds, they thought that Donald Trump was going to win in 2020. And the fact that he didn't, and more people may have voted, then something must have been a foul. But what I found compelling is that you had so many court cases come and be brought and then not be adjudicated against the Trump campaign. And so, as a lawyer, we always investigate, like, every type of case I've had. I'm a litigator, right? I investigate stuff. Clients bring something. You do some type of formal investigation if you're going to bring a lawsuit or if you're defending a lawsuit. And normally, when there's wrongdoing, and I spend most of my career defending clients, it's easy to find. It's not that hard to find. And I've had clients that have deep pockets where you can spend $1 million on an investigation. And then I know the Trump campaign had access to that kind of money. And I just have a hard time believing that if there really was voter fraud, or if there was something along those lines, and especially now that we have the benefit of 4 years of hindsight, that it would not have come to light by now. And so I can understand where you're coming from, Brett. At the time, we didn't have the benefit of 4 years, right? So I can understand people saying, this doesn't seem right. But what I had a hard time with even then was well, where is, like, it's just vibes. Like, there was no smoking gun. There was nothing indicating other than how people felt that something was wrong. It's not even, there were no hanging chads. There were no, for those of us who remember the 2000
it wasn't
election.
Florida's fault this time.
Yeah, there weren't recounts going on that were showing that there were real indiscrepancies going on. That it just was vibes. And that's really what upset me at the time. Was 60 cases is a lot of cases to bring and have them all go against you when you have the kind of resources that the Trump campaign had at that point. And so then to use that as, the lack of evidence, and then somehow to then say that the election was stolen to motivate what happened on January 6th. That has always been the thing that bothered me. And now 4 years later, I just don't think anything, if it was there, we would have found it. It's one of those things.
Sophia, to your point about vibes, I think it's important for us to reflect back on what 2020 was like. And probably for your typical Trump voter, they would have been the people who were skeptical of Fauci, skeptical of masking, skeptical of stay-at-home orders. And so I could see where a lot of the people who would believe that the election was stolen were the same people who were just tired of having spent 8 or 9 months, locked up at home, wearing masks, not being able to go to their jobs, probably having kids at home who weren't able to go to school, things like that. So not saying that it's excusable, but maybe having a little bit of sympathy for the mindset that some people were in, of like, if I can believe that my government in this free country is sort of forcing all of this upon me right now, I could maybe believe that they did something squirrely with the election. So
I don't, Dion, to be honest, I don't. The people who got violent at the Capitol, I hold that against them. But for the people that were just there to protest, to legitimately, the vibes were off, and they just wanted to be there. They wanted to blow off steam and be surrounded by fellow people. Okay, fine, whatever. to be honest, the vibes are off a little bit on this one for me, but that's because I just cannot believe that Trump was elected again. But I have some amount of faith in our intelligence community that if something untoward had happened, they would find it. There would be some evidence, and nothing has come out. Therefore, okay, like you have to have some level of trust in your government and in those institutions. So I don't hold it against the majority of the people. I bet that there were a lot of people at the Capitol that once they started seeing how this was going down, they turned around and tried to get out of there. But I do hold it against Trump.
I actually want to point out something though. I'm sitting here thinking, Dion, you pointed out something that's interesting or ironic, and that I think sometimes has gotten, I don't want to say forgotten, but it's like conflated when you talk about how people were feeling in 2020 going into that election and the distrust of government and Fauci. But you highlighted Fauci, but Fauci was serving at the request of President Trump. He was the head of a federal agency that under Trump's administration. So the government that they were distrusting was also the same government that they were protesting to keep in place. So that's where I understand that's the role of state governments and shutdowns and stuff like that. But there's an irony there of some of the things that people were upset about and who was in charge at the time, and that those things were happening, and you know what I mean. So I've always found that to be a disconnect of,
oh yeah,
you know what I mean. It's like, well, I'm not happy with COVID shutdowns. I'm not happy with certain things, but yet I'm going to then violently protest to keep that same government in place. That I understand there was frustration, but I've always felt with certain types of MAGA folks, it's just that they want to blame somebody, but there's not like a cognitive, there's just not it doesn't seem to be coherent to the line from A to B when it comes to that.
Yeah.
And, like Brett, I feel bad sometimes because like when you talk, like you can hear like you've thought through and this is how I think. And it's like independent thought there. But I don't always hear that from the logic that led to January 6th. When you hear people talk about, what motivated them to go and do some of the things that they did, it just felt like a groupthink, pack, mob mentality where folks were just angry and they took it out, they took it out in the worst way at our Capitol.
Yeah, I mean, but that's any riot that you get into. You have that mob mentality that takes over. This one just happened to be at the Capitol. I mean, we saw, riots in Minnesota and Seattle over the last few years, too. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that happens from that.
What are you talking about, Brett?
Well, city on fire, all that kind of stuff.
I mean,
other instances in 2020 that led to riots. So.
Do we think this was different, though? I guess you bring up a good point, right? Because I think one thing I do hear a lot when you bring up January 6th is there's this sense that it's no different than any other type of riot or protest that got out of hand. People compare it to the things that had happened earlier in the summer of 2020 in the wake of the George Floyd killing. So is that how you see it? Do you think it's all the same?
Not necessarily. I mean, I do think the extremism that you have with people, because you talk about someone who has a disconnect in their thought process. Honestly, most people that live on the fringes and in the extremes, they do have a disconnect in that you can't always find a logical progression of how they get from point A to point B. Right. And it's usually not point A to point B. They're jumping from point A to point F. Right. I mean, there's several steps in between that you can't see it. And I think that's probably the case. But I imagine when you do have a lot of people that are discontent going in with the intent of peaceful protest. But then if you have someone that kind of stirs it up and, pushes people to that, it can
what
drive
if the
that.
person stirring it up?
Who stirred it up?
I knew that was going to be a point to be made.
And I saw Dion's face.
So I don't think that the protest getting out of hand, the group thing, that sort of thing happens if Trump goes out there and says, hey guys, we lost, go home, stop. I don't think, I don't know. I have a hard time thinking that it gets that far out of control if Trump goes out there early. I don't know, or never says that it was stolen in the first place.
That brings up a good question in my mind, and it's something that I've been wrestling with for the past 4 years, longer really. But it kind of speaks to Donald Trump's mental state, which is, does he really believe that he lost the 2020 election? Or does he know that he did? And he just, you know what I mean? Like, because it's hard to tell with Donald Trump the things that he actually believes, like he truly actually believes, and the things that he will just say because they're convenient and popular for him to say. And I honestly can't tell, because if he truly believed that he had won and it had been stolen from him, then I could imagine wanting to do everything in your power to stop the steal, right? If you truly believe that some part of the government has been corrupted and weaponized against you, and you believe that you have the populace behind you, then I could imagine you maybe envision yourself, and especially if your ego is the size of Donald J. Trump's ego, you might envision yourself as a George Washington or Thomas Jefferson type figure, you know.
But Dion, that was the point of the January 6th inquiries, and that whole second impeachment was. I mean, they showed communications, and people testified that, like, they told him to his face that he lost, or they had a text exchange with him where he's like, "I don't care that I lost." Like, in general, I tend to agree with you that, like, if he truly believed it, and he is so egotistical that he may very well think that he had won it, but there was evidence during those inquiries that, like, he knew that what he was doing from right after the election for that couple of months, that that all the signs pointed towards no, and that he had not actually won the election. But I think that's why the way that it all went down with kind of the Senate shutting down, it went through the House. Nothing really happened with the Senate. You know, I think we were a little bit like shortchanged the answers that we kind of needed, unbeknownst that we were going to be in this situation 4 years later, where, you know, everyone said that the 2024 election was a sham until Trump won, and now all of a sudden it's the best election ever.
I think, though, it doesn't actually matter whether he believed it or not, right? So I'll put it in the legal term, the reasonable person standard. So normally with crimes and with different things where you're talking about, like, you know, like self-defense, you apply a reasonable person. Would a reasonable person in that person's position under the same circumstances have made the same choice? So a lot of times different crimes and different torts, you assess it on what would a reasonable person do. We always joke, who the hell is this reasonable person? But, you know, in this instance, you would say somebody who was a reasonable person who was provided the information that Donald Trump was being provided under those circumstances would have concluded that they lost the election based on what, and I'm basing this off of what came out during the January 6th inquiries, right? Where you have people testifying, you have, you know, people like Bill Barr, you know, the Attorney General stating there's no evidence of foul play. These types of folks, I think a reasonable person would have said, you know what, there's no evidence of that this election was stolen, you know, and for the good of the country, as a president who if he respected the peaceful transition of power, you would have told people, hey, look, I don't like how it turned out. Kind of like Brett said, maybe, you know, something doesn't feel right, but I have nothing to hang my hat on here. And for the good of the country, let's transition and live to fight another day. Because to me, there was never anything wrong with the idea of Trump running again, like he just did, and taking back the White House. I never opposed that. That's democracy, right? But my issue was this idea that when you lost, then you literally, it's like you're going to burn the house down. You know, I don't agree with it. I didn't agree with it with the riots that happened anytime riots happen, I'm like, I think like you said earlier, I'm against it. All of us agree, violence is not the way to get your point across. But what I have an issue with now, and why I think it matters, like why are we even talking about this today, is that I really have a hard time with this idea that now the folks who were arrested and convicted of crimes associated with their actions on January 6th are going to be pardoned as if they were martyrs. And that's where I really, that's what kind of keeps the issue alive for me. And it doesn't sit well with me, because then it's like this idea that, they did the wrong thing but now they're being treated as if they were like fighters from some type of cause.
Well, I'm just kind of curious with that. I mean, you've got.
Go ahead, Brett.
Go ahead, Brett.
I'm just kind of curious with that too. I mean, I didn't follow through on it, so I don't really know. But talking back to the riots we mentioned before, when we look at Minnesota and Seattle, what happened to people with those riots? Was there any follow-on prosecution for anybody that had issues?
I actually my mom has a friend whose brother is still incarcerated because he fired a weapon in LA during the George Floyd riots. And when he fired his gun, it was in the direction of a police officer, and he was charged with assault with a deadly weapon on a police officer. They actually started with attempted murder. They reduced the charges, and he's still in prison for that, So, I mean, if people committed crimes in any other riot, any other protests gone awry, they get arrested and then they due process, and whatever crimes they committed, they go through the system. And at the end of the day, Gavin Newsom isn't, giving clemency. In California, it's called clemency. It's not a pardon. But he's not giving clemency for folks that were convicted of those crimes, and that's where that's what I kind of like doesn't sit well with me, as far as the way.
Yeah, and I agree with you. That's how it should be, right? To where, I mean, because even with the January 6th folks, like if you damaged property, if you assaulted a police officer, I don't care what side on, like that's not the right way to go about it. You need to, serve whatever punishment comes from that. And so I'm in agreement with that. Now, of the 1,200 or whatever cases that there are, do I think all of them deserve, prison time and, they've been on the hook for 4 years or whatever? I don't know if that's the case, but I think anybody who was guilty, then they need to be treated as such.
And I think the thing that made this complicated is the jurisdictional issues, because typically when folks are doing, these types of protests, they're going to be in states and they're going to be prosecuted under state law. And the federal government doesn't normally step in and get involved in those criminal prosecutions. But with January 6th, because of the nature of what they were doing, because of the attack on the Capitol and all that, you actually had federal jurisdiction for a lot of these crimes. And that's where it's different. Like, you get convicted under state law. Most times you're not going to serve your full sentence. A federal sentence is a federal sentence. There is no early release and all that kind of stuff for the most part, typically outside of COVID times under federal sentencing. So I think that has impacted why some of these folks, they've served time for full, like they're serving real time for the crimes they committed because they were convicted under federal laws.
So if we look back at the 1,500 commutations that President Biden just did for federal crimes, where does that play in?
That was the whole thing. It was nonviolent. What do you call it? Weren't they drug related? For a lot of those folks were convicted and, under laws that aren't even in place, that are now for marijuana and things like that, where it's legal now in other states. I mean, and I know you guys had the debate last episode that I wasn't on when we talked about the pardon power. My issue is specifically, we are what we celebrate, and so we can have a discussion about, how each president uses the pardon power, and I kind of agreed with what most of you guys said, as far as I was disappointed in Biden when he pardoned, his son, because I do think it took away the moral high ground from the Democratic Party, like Will talked about. But here, the fact is, most presidents don't come into office, with the exception of Ford, with a promise to pardon. That's normally not one of their platforms, that folks are coming into office saying, well, I'm going to pardon these people. And he specifically seems to be highlighting them as heroes. What does he call them? He has a nickname for the January 6 folks, not prisoners of war. I'll think of it.
Yeah, something like that.
but he basically refers to them as heroes and champions their actions on that day, and so that's that's a hard pill for me to swallow, because whether or not
Yeah, and
yeah.
I say
It
I'm
does
with you
go
on that, Thea. Like I said, anybody who did violent action or did something against the law, then
Mhm.
yeah, they should, kind of pay the price for that. I mean, I don't know if there was 1,200 people that all did those actions, or if they just kind of, some of them got caught in it and just were there at the wrong time when things went down. I don't know, right? I wasn't there, so I can't speak to that. But I would hope that there's enough evidence for people that were just kind of wrong place, wrong time, that they could go through. And those people, I would hope that we would pardon, or at least
Do you
offer
think
something to.
does that mean that you don't believe in, what is your feeling about the criminal justice system as a whole, right? Because it's not like these people were just arrested and convicted without due process. Every single one of the individuals who was convicted of a crime or pled out for a crime had the same protections of our systems as any other person so I don't understand this idea that they were wrongfully, if they were really in the quote unquote wrong place, right time, do we think that they didn't have a defense, they didn't have the opportunity to provide evidence of that? That's where I don't understand this idea that innocent people were punished for January 6th.
Some of the stories that I've seen indicate that at least some of the people were incarcerated for a while, awaiting their trial date, and
That's
of
normal.
course
Yeah.
that means that they lost their jobs and everything. So, were some of these people who were incarcerated for a long time, lost their jobs, and ended up pleading out to something, maybe just people whose greatest crime was actually just trespass? I don't know, right? But it's conceivable that there are people whose lives were completely broken because they entered the Capitol unlawfully, but that's all they did. And just because the criminal justice system took so long to attend to that, they ended up pleading out to whatever they could just to get out of there and get back to their lives. I don't know, right? There are so many cases that went through. Um, I do have here. So none of us were there. I was here in the DC area on the day. Um, so I was close to it, but I do have a close family member who is a DC cop, and he was there. He was called in as soon as the Capitol was breached. He was called in. He asked that I not give his name because any statements that are made that go through the media, which I guess we're considered media now, they have
To
to
be
go through the public affairs and all
public.
that stuff.
Yeah.
And so he was like, don't mention my name or anything, but he and I were talking about it, and I told him that we were going to do this topic on an upcoming podcast. And so he said, well, let me tell you what I saw and everything. So normally he's out on the Potomac doing patrols, and so that's why it took him a little while to get there, because he had to pull up to the dock. He had to grab all of his gear and huff it over to the Capitol. But by the time he got there, people were already inside, and he was part of the team that retook the rotunda. He said that probably about half the people there were actually being violent in that, and he called it like a mosh pit kind of violence, where most of it was pushing, shoving, maybe like not actually like taking swings at each other, but mostly just pushing people and just kind of yelling and like that. He did say that, there was like a construction site where they were building up the stages and everything for the inauguration, where there were like power tools and scaffolding and things, and people were like taking those apart and throwing them, and like they were taking pieces of scaffolding and trying to like javelin people with them. So those people obviously should be tried and hopefully convicted of at least like assault with a deadly weapon, whatever, right? Just like we were talking. um, he did say, though, that like half the people, he said there was like some 80-year-old grandma just sitting on one of the benches in the rotunda smoking a joint, right? And he was like, all right, grandma, you need to get out of here. Like, there's the door, go that way. And she was like, all right, cool, I'm out, So he said that was about half the people, right? And the one thing that he said was that as far as he knew from his team and everybody he talked to, there were no guns confiscated at the Capitol, right? Nobody was armed that they encountered. They did confiscate firearms that day, but they were all confiscated at the metal detectors and the security checkpoints before the Trump rally. So people were trying to show up armed there, but I think they got like all the guns that people were trying to sneak in at the rally. And so nobody was armed when they went to the Capitol. And then finally, the thing we were talking about, the other riots and things that got out of control earlier that year. And one of the things that he said was, to the police, it was not lost on them the complete change in the leadership's position on policing the riots, because all through the summer, they were basically told, hang back and do like minimal policing, right? Like if people actually get to the point where they're like assaulting people and stuff, you can step in. But when they were like breaking windows and, you know, flipping cars and stuff, they were like, be hands off, you know. As soon as it was the Capitol, they were like, drop everything and get over here and squash this immediately. And so
I will point out, I had a friend who was a congressional staffer though on January 6th. And I think the thing we're leaving out is part of that is you have like an entire branch of government that were in that building, and they don't know, you know, I mean, it was not known what the threat was. So it's one thing to tell with the police to get the instruction, okay, don't escalate a riot to protect property. But on January 6th, there were people in that building that were under that, you know, you can't say don't respond or minimize your response.
To be fair, here in DC, a lot of the buildings that were affected by the riots during the summer were occupied as well. It's not like they were all vacant.
Yeah, but were there people running for their lives in those buildings? Is that what you're saying? The police were saying don't go and protect the people in those buildings, or where was the guidance that to, because I think the key difference where I'm thinking of it is what was motivating a lot of those riots, right, that were happening in the summer of 2020 was the fact that a cop had murdered somebody, okay, and that there was a lot of underlying issues with, you know, feeling that here it is, this police officer had murdered a citizen. Okay. And I'll say that. I'm not going to say allegedly because he's convicted of murder. Right. And so now when you're sending in police officers to try to quelch those types of riots, there's the fear that you're adding, you know, fuel to a fire. Right. So I can understand the cautious nature of, okay, we don't want to just send in cops guns a-blazing because you're just creating a bigger, you know, the potential for more loss of life. And again, what is it that you're, you know, I understand that. On January 6th, though, like I said, my friend who was a staffer, you know, there was this uncertainty amongst Congress. I mean, we saw this also with the hearings where people were like, they're making phone calls talking about sending in the National Guard because the members of Congress were genuinely, they thought they were under attack. So I don't think it's this idea that there wasn't a threat. And, you know, maybe guns weren't confiscated, but in the moment, you don't know that. We were all in the military. Yeah. You know, you go into Delta, you don't know.
I don't want to put Pelosi and hang Pence. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
I don't want to put words into my family member's mouth, and I'm trying to, you know, I wasn't sitting there with a tape recorder or a pen and paper while we were having this discussion. But my takeaway from it was that he and a lot of his fellow cops during that summer were very frustrated at having to basically stand by and watch a lot of definitely destruction of property, but he also, at least to me, it seemed that he was intimating that there was also some violence, like personal violence also happening, that they were like, don't really get involved unless you think that person's actually going to die. And even then, like, you know, so they were basically being told, like, treat everything with kid gloves. And then as soon as it was the Congress members, because, you know, it was like Mayor Bowser and the congressional members, they run DC, right? Per the Constitution, DC is their jurisdiction. And he, you know, again, like he said, basically it felt like, oh, now that it's our stuff on the line, you guys come in guns blazing and you better protect this. So
wouldn't I think this is an honest question. The people, the cops that were being told to kind of stand down for the other riots, would that not have been coming from their own chiefs of police? I mean, but
also Mayor Bowser. To some
extent, the mayors of those other cities and whatnot, right? But I mean, it's not like I don't know. It's not like the DC politicians were the ones telling the cops in Seattle, hey, don't do anything. And then,
No, well, I'm specifically talking about the DC cops, right? So, because.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I guess my issue, this comes back to the question I had, is, are we thinking all that January, I guess, let me not form it as a question. I'll just make a statement. To me, January 6th felt distinct because it was a moment in which the riot sought to disrupt the mechanisms of our government, right? And so that it happened on a specific day for a specific purpose to stop, the certification of an election. And so, yes, it was chaos. Yes, it was a riot. But when the folks entered the Capitol, and a number of the folks that were, egressing on the Capitol, the whole issue was they wanted to stop this the transition of power. And I think that's what makes it distinct to me. It wasn't just we're burning the city down. It just wasn't violence and chaos for the sake of violence and chaos. And so, I do think that then you do need to use the levers of government that you have to be able to maintain that order, right? So I understand it being more urgent given what was happening that day, and what was, what they sought to do. And then it doesn't help what you have them yelling, "Hang Mike Pence." I've seen the videos where you hear the folks chanting that. You don't need a gun to hang somebody, right? So whether they could, if a number of people overrun anything, unfortunately, we saw with the young woman who did lose her life. Once you're starting, you're starting to penetrate, or get close, or it looks like because they don't know what her intentions were. So unfortunately, she did lose her life. So I don't know. It's hard. I have mixed feelings in the terms of, every time I think of it, I think it's a dark day in our history.
So I think we should talk about Trump's role in it. And Will, you kind of alluded to this earlier. Who incited the riot, and we should probably talk about did Trump incite an insurrection?
So I think that he got people there, right? Be there. It's going to be wild, I think was the tweet that he sent out. I don't think that it was directly his fault that people got violent necessarily, but then watching it on TV for hours before he goes out and gives a half-hearted stand back and stand by type thing, I think he could have stopped it much earlier. And I think the whole thing could have avoided if he didn't try to get people there in the first place, in the weeks and months leading up to it. But I do have a hard time basically the fact that people got violent. I think you have to put that on those people for doing that. But he's not free and clear though either,
I think he was the Flava Flav of January 6th. You guys remember Flava Flav, why he was famous? He was once upon a time was a musician and was the hype man for the concerts, and he would show up and, get the crowd hyped. And, that was his thing. I feel like Trump was that on January 6th. He helped, there were people who were clearly already kind of riled up. And I think that he helped kind of turn up the volume a little bit on that crowd. I'll agree with Will. I don't think, I think it's hard. I don't want to sound like a lawyer, but, it's like the definition of what does it mean to incite? What does it mean? What is an insurrection? All of that. I think it's a moot point now for us to even, try to, but I do think that it was irresponsible as a leader.
We don't know what's going to happen.
Is it a moot point?
I think it's a moot point because
could show up tomorrow.
He's, I think it's a moot point because he's not, the whatever, the Senate decided not to impeach him. The people have spoken. He's been reelected. I don't think litigating the legalities of whether he actually committed this offense at this point is helpful to the country. I don't think it serves a good. I do think as a leader, though, it was disappointing. I think he failed as a leader on that day. And, the four of us spent many years studying leadership and how the way you assess different situations and you lead your people. And I do think he absolutely failed as a leader on that day to recognize once the chaos started, he should have been on TV the second folks were penetrating the Capitol. The first person we should have seen on TV was Donald Trump, really emphatically asking people to go home and explaining why this was wrong. Like, it took too long. And then when it was a failure of leadership.
But I think he was being opportunistic.
He got what he wanted. So,
but that's still a failure of leadership.
So you say it's a failure of leadership. I would say that it's a failure of moral leadership.
Character. I'm being kind. I'm being very kind. I'm being very kind and generous here because I'm trying to stay in the lane of what I know.
Like what he probably hoped would happen.
Yeah.
Then he was probably leading his people exactly the way that he needed to, just absolutely towing the line of, he didn't overtly say, go take the Capitol and do this. But if it happened to turn out that way and they stopped the certification of the votes, I don't think that he would go on TV and be like, oh, tisk tisk, you shouldn't have done that. I think he would have been like, well, yeah, we stopped the steal. Great job. You know what I mean?
I agree with you, Dion. And I think I agree with you. Thea's personal vibe or feeling, opinion is, I think he very much wanted them to stop the certification. I think he was upset that Mike Pence didn't go along with this plan for him to interrupt the certification of the election. I think in hindsight, he loves the fact that people stormed the Capitol on his behalf. I think that that's indicated by the way he speaks about the folks that served, whatever, that got arrested or whatever for it, have been punished for it. But without, I guess what I know, that's what I feel, what I think, but what I know is that a leader should have handled that situation differently, right? So I guess I choose not to go down the road of, what we can accuse him of, but I know in my heart of heart, a true leader should have done, there are certain things that he absolutely should have done differently that day. And it really is the response once we saw violence was happening, his failure to respond is where I'm just like, no. I was a captain, and there were times where I seemed, I remember reacting better than this man did as president of the United States. When I saw something bad happening or a crisis starting.
So, can we talk about the 14th Amendment? Those that participate in an insurrection can never hold office again. I mean, it was designed for the Civil War. But the reason I want to kind of bring that up a little bit is, Dion, you had made a point earlier about people who were incarcerated and it took a while for their court date to come up and their lives are ruined. And in my head,
happens every day.
I started laughing and I was like, yeah,
that happens every day. Welcome to the criminal justice
world. The criminal justice system has some issues, but it only seems to be a problem when it affects certain people. Yes, our criminal justice system has issues, and people's lives are ruined all the time because they're awaiting court date, even if what they end up being convicted of or pleading down to is not as big of a deal. But in the same vein, could we not have done a better job of adjudicating what actually happened on January 6th? We had 4 years to do it, because you've got some group of people now that are like, it's still going to happen. He can't take office because, he incited an insurrection. And, but I mean, how do you prove that? How do you define incite? And we had 4 years to kind of get to the bottom of all this. And it also plays into all the other lawsuits that are going on that are about to be dropped, that we had 4 years to prosecute and couldn't get across the finish line. But in this particular case for January 6th, there's a group of people out there that say he will be an illegitimate president because according to the Constitution, he can't legally hold office.
But are they right?
Why is the Attorney General's name escaping me? What's his name?
Merrick Garland?
Merrick Garland.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he has a lot. I'm. It doesn't. Yes, court cases take a long time to bring. It takes a long time for a case to go from the beginning, cradle to grave, right? I do think that our system failed. I think Merrick Garland should have been much more aggressive about adjudicating the January 6th. What happened on January 6th, who played a role in what. I understand that they kind of deferred to Congress, and then, but even after, to me, the minute that congressional inquiry was done and the investigation was done and we had those hearings, charges should have been brought. I actually don't think they should have waited and drug it out the way they did. It didn't benefit the American people, because then you never got to see that process never got to go all the way through. And I think a lot of it was based on this assumption that Trump wouldn't run again. And I think that was a mistake.
Or that if he did run again, he wouldn't win.
But my thing is, you didn't give the American people the information, because now things are still caught up in a case that never, there was never. I think it's one thing, the hush money case, most Americans didn't care about that. At least I didn't. And I was like, who cares? You paid a woman that you had an affair with money. I don't think most people cared. I don't think they really were paying attention. I would hope that if you really had a trial where a jury saw evidence, where then they could understand, what happened, and it's really played out for a jury, then, you would have gotten an answer of how would an average American who's sitting on a jury see this information. And we never got that, and then it would be a public record. Everything would be in the public record, even beyond what we got from Congress, as far as whatever evidence they had of what happened on that day. We didn't get that.
What sort of is tied in with that as well is, again, if you remember, we didn't really come out of COVID lockdowns truly until end of 22, beginning of 23. That was when school was more or less like normal again, because there were still kids that were doing at least like hybrid schedules and stuff in
but the
22.
Courts. I was gainfully employed the whole time, right? The courts didn't close.
I get that. What I'm getting at is like, we got to kind of put again, I'm getting back to the Americans who were sitting at home and feeling like their government was against them from the start of COVID through all of the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates and mask mandates and all that stuff, right? And so going to your point about not having this trial, not pursuing this quickly, is we had kind of the same video footage rolling all the time about like what happened on January 6th, right? So whenever it would come up, it was kind of the same few minutes of video footage that everybody saw. When it became apparent very quickly that there was like 44,000 hours of surveillance camera footage from outside and inside the Capitol. And I think a lot of people, right, again, people are sitting there thinking like, my government is hiding stuff from me because of all this COVID stuff. And then you hear there's 44,000 hours of video footage, and like nobody's talking about that, right? We're not pursuing this. Like, if there truly was evidence about this, why aren't we going after Trump, kind of thing, right?
I mean, every crime in the history of crimes that are prosecuted in this country, the DA or whoever the prosecuting body is going to have to decide what evidence that they present and they put on their case. And then the person has the ability to defend themselves. So you may have an overabundance of evidence. Oklahoma City, there was a ridiculous amount of evidence that was tied to that case, right? And so you have to pick and choose. You're not going to ever use all of it. What I'm saying is we're responding to Will's question about the 14th Amendment. Because we never had a trial, because the process never went through, we were able to go through the full process. we don't have it was never adjudicated whether he was guilty of these crimes associated with this insurrection. And I don't even think that was what they even brought charges for, if I'm clear. I don't remember what he was specifically indicted for relating to January 6th, as far as Trump was concerned. But my whole point is, if they had gone through the process sooner, it could have actually been, we could have had a judgment, we could have had a verdict. And then then we would have been able to rightfully apply the 14th Amendment in the way that it was meant to be, or to at least it would have been a real question, right? Because then we would have said this person was convicted of X. Does the 14th Amendment apply? Now it's just a hypothetical.
Yeah, I guess what I was getting at is sort of tagging along with your point about how Merrick Garland dragged his feet. The DC District Court dragged their feet because they didn't charge Trump until August 1st, 2023.
That's
for
ridiculous.
An insurrection, right? What I was getting at is that this sort of delay in going after him, I think probably also fed, this kind of goes back to our discussion about the media and its role. Like the things that the media doesn't report on also have an effect on the American psyche. When somebody asks the question of why isn't the media talking about this, right? And so I think all of that kind of, there will be a contingent of Americans who will say, well, if something was there, they would have gone after him right away. The fact that they didn't, and they waited so long until it was like re-election season again.
Dion, I think we're making the same argument, because I'm saying
that's what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with you.
Dion's agreeing.
We're making the same argument.
Yeah,
because the thing is, that's my point, is that you didn't need to be too, and we, like, I struggle with this in cases myself, right? Sometimes I think lawyers, we want to build a perfect case before we you file your lawsuit, or before you bring charges or whatever. But given what was happening, the delay, I felt like that hurt the country, right? Like what you're saying, it fed into this idea that, well, that if he really done something wrong, then why didn't you bring charges right away? Why did it take years? And I don't think it needed to take years, right? I think that delay was irresponsible on the part of Merrick Garland. And
that goes along with, people they're talking now about how, the day before the election, Biden and Harris are both like, Trump is an existential threat to the country, blah, blah, blah. And then he gets elected and they're like, okay, let's,
they're like, we believe in the peaceful transition of power
to Hitler.
Yeah. It's like, really?
So it's like, do you believe that this is an existential threat, in which case you would not have rolled over the next day potentially, if we thought that Trump incited an insurrection and therefore should, be banned from running for election again, why did we not take this to trial on January 7th? Like why?
Yeah. Or once the impeachment was over. I think that's why when I said it's kind of a moot point, I would rather, what I want to do is move on as a country. I want to move on. I don't want to keep talking about 2020. I don't want to keep talking, it's ironic. Yes, Trump is president. I want to see what he does and react to what's happening today. And if, I want to just move on. And I guess, and this is the progressive of the group saying, like, if we weren't going to do anything 2 years ago, then I don't want to talk about it anymore. You know what I mean? What I pray for, and what I'm genuinely afraid for tomorrow and the next few weeks, after we saw what happened in New Orleans, what we saw what happened in Vegas, is I really, really hope no one uses this as an excuse for additional violence. I really, really hope we don't see anything bad happen tomorrow and the following weeks, as we transition. And I don't know, but right now we see that folks are not well, and there are still people who will commit horrible acts of violence, and so we'll see, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Brett, you've been quiet for a while.
Go ahead, Brett.
No, I honestly, probably the reason for that is Thea voiced my thoughts about this whole thing pretty accurately. I'm ready to move on. It was one of those, like, even like the hours leading up to this podcast today, I'm sitting here, I'm like, gosh, I just don't care anymore. Can we just move past it?
That's the
right. Like, I understand it happened. Yes, it's there, but my gosh, let's go forward.
I'm not normalizing it, but I feel like the time to fight, we didn't do it.
I agree. I mean, yes, we sat on our hands for way too long. But whether we're talking about January 6th or any of the other many things, we've become numb to like Dion, I think you said it earlier, like, he paid off a porn star. Like, what do I
said
care?
that.
Yeah. Like, what do you mean? What, like, Clinton, like, I mean, we were all in arms when it happened to Clinton, but now it happens to Trump, and we're like, it's Trump. Like,
I know. No,
the least of the things he's done, you know?
I agree with you. I hear what you're saying, Will. I hear what you're saying. I don't want to normalize this idea that bad things and bad behavior and poor morals in our leaders doesn't matter. I don't want to normalize that. But what I am saying is when these things happen, we either address them in real time or once the time has passed. I don't want to just stay in this place and not move forward because we have bigger things to worry about, right? And part of why I think we are in the position where Trump was able to get reelected is that we weren't focused enough on, like, we didn't keep our eye on the ball, right? And we didn't act with the right amount of urgency that we should have. And then we lost the people, we lost the mob, right? They said in Gladiator, Rome is the mob, right? And whoever controls the mob controls Rome. Well, we lost the mob, and therefore we lost the US, we lost the election. And so I just want to focus on how do we get folks back to a place where they want a better type of leader than Trump, or a different type of leadership than what Donald Trump represents. And so as a Democrat,
that's a whole deeper
topic.
I mean, that's going to be beyond the presidency. Yeah. That comes down to, again, local politics. We've said that before. People need to be more involved in their communities because as you go higher up the chain, it's just a reflection of what's happening lower down. These people keep getting kind of pushed up through the system. It needs to be different. But, point that one of you guys are making in terms of like, why are we okay with some things happen? And, all of these political things that are happening on both sides. I mean, scandals all over the place and, articles that come out and whatever it gets thrown out there. To me, it's almost kind of like market saturation. It's like superhero movies, right? You get to the point like, okay, there's enough of them. I don't care anymore.
There's not enough.
Right. And I think people are that way. I'm not the same. I love the superhero movies. Right. But that's probably why we're the people here still talking about this stuff, because it matters. But I think the average person, they're like, I'm just done with it. I don't care about the politics anymore. Can we just move on with our lives?
All right. So wrap it all up in a bow. I think what I hear all of us agreeing on is that Trump's behavior on January 6th probably was not ideal. Some people may say that it was criminal. Some people will say that it was simply less than stellar leadership. But in any case, he was never convicted of inciting an insurrection or being part of an insurrection. And therefore, the 14th Amendment doesn't apply. And so there should be no legal reason for him not to be certified for the election tomorrow on January 6th.
I think that's an accurate summary of where we are. I don't like it. Let me be clear. I don't want anybody to listen to this to think, oh, Fia's okay with all this. I'm not. But I do think that it is what it is. We didn't, it's like there was a time to address these things. I think we dropped the ball. And, I say we, metaphorically, right? And now.
Well, you mean the Democrats, right? When you say we, right?
I mean, metaphorically, I guess Merrick Garland.
Anyone who cares about our country.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I'll share the blame. Like I said on our re-election episode, I brought up January 6th as one of the non-starters of why I could never vote for Trump. A deal breaker for me with him was his actions on January 6th. I thought it was a failure of leadership that was, unforgivable. And that, again, that's me being generous. So, the people who voted for him, it is what it is. That wasn't a disqualifier as far as who he is as a leader. But what now I want to do is I want to see what he does next, right? Because I don't have faith in Trump. I don't. But I'm hoping whatever I want to have faith that our government and our institutions will survive the next 4 years, because January 6th did question the strength of our institutions. It did kind of put certain things into question, like how close we came to being a banana republic.
You know what? I think that's a really good point that you bring up. And I think that it is worth noting. Now, it did come down to a handful of strong individuals. In particular, I think Mike Pence, right? And I think we have to give credit to Mike Pence for looking at the situation and saying, you know what? All the evidence to me says that we lost the election, and therefore it is my duty to certify the election results as per law, right? I think it is noteworthy to show that our system of government faced a trial and came through it.
I agree
It
with
wasn't
that.
pretty, but that should give us some glimmer of hope that we as America maybe can continue to thrive.
The question is, I hope. I don't think JD Vance it has the same type of. I don't have the same. I don't know that I ever had faith in Mike Pence, but I don't know if the outcome would have been the same had it been JD Vance in that position versus Mike Pence at the time. So
Yeah.
we'll see. And that's what I'm saying. I guess I'm more worried about what comes next, and I think I'm saving my energy for whatever comes next. And that's why I'm like, it's time for us to move on, for better or worse. It's like you just had a bad breakup, and now it's like, okay, I got to figure out how to live my life. We just went through a divorce, whatever you want to call it, whatever metaphor you want to apply.
And Thea, I think the only thing I have on that is I think the reason we lost, what did you say? We lost the ball?
Like, dropped the ball or something. I don't know.
The reason we dropped the ball is because we had 10 balls in the air based on just so many things that Trump had done. And to do a clean break, clean slate, look to the future, whatever it is you want to call it, I think you have to keep all of that in mind as we move forward. I agree. You can't litigate the past. Like, a lot of that time has passed. But on day one, when, I don't know, he says the military needs to go round up immigrants, you have to evaluate that or look at that, but in respect to all of the things that led up to that before. And my fear is like, okay, clean slate. All right, well, that's the first thing he's done. We need to give him 5 more tries. And then we end up back where we were.
I agree with you. And I'm not saying forgive or forget. I'm just saying, save your energy for the more battles to come. And I don't like using the word battles, but save your energy for whatever is coming next. Because like you said, there are things that we're going to be dealing with as a country that we can foresee. And there's a lot of stuff we probably can't foresee in that. I just think there's just going to be more to come. I don't think we're done yet. I don't think that Donald Trump's going to come into office and suddenly be this great leader that he's going to go down in the history. And all that was just a bad administration 4 years ago. I don't think that's what we're about. I don't think that's what we just signed up for.
There is an argument that people are making right now is that, we wasted too much time on these crazy tweets, that we need to let him just say his crazy stuff and not react to it and only save our energy for the really bad things that he does. And I get the reasoning behind that, but it's, especially as someone who aspires to be in that, maybe not that exact position, but that kind of in that role, like, that's just such a low bar to
I agree. Words matter. And leadership matters.
I would say probably that, and this goes back to, we were talking about like political correctness and wokeism. I think, when everything is outrageous, then nothing is outrageous anymore. Right. And so it's probably that saturation of, there were so many things that he tweeted and said and stuff that everybody was getting outraged at, that after a certain point, everybody was just kind of deaf to it. But all right, so we've probably talked enough about that. Let's talk about what's been making us happy this past week or these past couple of weeks, since it's been a while since we chatted. Brett, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So obviously just coming out of the Christmas season. So biggest thing, happiness with me is just spending time with family. We got a chance to just be here at home. Kids had a little bit of a cough, and so we were, trying to avoid public places. Everybody was fine. They'd had the antibiotics, or they were good, but they still had the cough, right? And so, to avoid the judgmental stares of the populace, we just kind of stayed home. So we didn't get a chance. But because of that, we did more crafty ideas for Christmas gifts this year. And so the kids got a cardboard cutting table. They got a 3D printing pen. They got bracelet kits, stuff like that. And I'll tell you what, this cardboard cutter, I think I have more fun with than the kids do. But I mean, it's awesome. If you ever get a chance to look at it, it's called the Chomp Saw. It's a pretty neat thing. It just went through a Kickstarter program. But anyway, just building stuff with the kids, watching their creativity, that just brought me a lot of joy over the last couple of weeks.
Thea?
I don't know. I have a cynical kind of, I don't know. I love the holidays, and the holidays are over, so I'm sad. The thing that made me happy today was the weather. It was really gorgeous today. So I kind of woke up. I was like, today is the first day of the holidays really being over, because, tomorrow's Monday and there's nothing to look forward to. And I was really sad. And then I went outside, and it probably was like in the 70s today. It was super warm. It was super sunny. I was like, maybe I'll go to the beach today. So I guess what's making me happy is that I live in Southern California, where we don't have 4 seasons. And every now and then it can be the beginning of January and feel like summer. And today was one of those days. It was a gorgeous California day. So I guess that made me happy while I'm in my post holiday blues. So.
That's that polar vortex coming down, right? Like
I was gonna say, we are experiencing Snowmageddon 2025 here in Ohio.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was. I think it was 20 degrees here in DC.
Degree weather. Climate change.
Wait, no,
about you, Will?
Yeah, I got 6 inches of snow outside. I'm waiting for global warming to kick in. So.
Oh my gosh, no! I'm sorry.
They're talking about Miami being like in the 20s or something in the next couple of days.
Climate change, man, it'll get you.
I'm in short sleeves, I'm
in a thermal. Come on. All right. So yeah, I think having family and for the holidays and all that kind of stuff, and this was our first Christmas kind of home after retiring and moving back home after the Air Force. So it was a little bit different for us. Family from across Florida kind of came to our place in Tampa. It's the first time we kind of hosted a family Christmas, and it was same kind of thing. Piper had the crud the last couple of days of school, and then into the Christmas break, but just having everyone around, it was kind of nice. But I mean, I am kind of glad that Piper's going back to school tomorrow, and
yeah, I'm ready for them to go back to school. Yeah,
I don't have a job to go back to tomorrow, so take that with a grain of salt. That I don't, Monday doesn't hurt quite as bad for me, but it was nice having family around.
Nice. So for me, the holidays were great. They were hectic. My family lives nearby. My parents' house is in walking distance, and my sister and everybody, grandparents, they live nearby. And that was great. My mother-in-law and my brother-in-law came to stay with us for a little while. So that was great also. But I think the thing that really, just really, truly made me happy is, I am still friends with a core group of friends that goes all the way back to middle school. Most of us became friends in like 7th or 8th grade, and we have stayed in touch this whole time. And at least once a year, we all get together. And this was yesterday. We got together at our friend's parents' house. And, we just brought food and drink and everything. We got together, and it's just amazing, right? Like we're all, we're all in the same class. So we're all about 45 years old, and we are still getting together with each other all these years later and still laughing and having a good time and sharing stories and stuff. And so it's really great. Shout out to all my friends from Lake Braddock. Really enjoy seeing you guys, and love seeing you guys every year, and let's try to make it more often. So,
that's
all
cool.
right. Next week, I think we're going to try to talk about something again that is, very apropos to the moment. So we might be thinking about talking about Trump's cabinet picks, because those appointment hearings are going to be coming up soon. We might be talking about just what we think Trump is going to do in the future, and where we think he might go with like Doge and things like that. But we're gonna try to jump into some more topics that are a lot more applicable to the moment as we do these recordings, and so hopefully our listeners and viewers will be able to hear something that actually speaks to them in the moment. As I said at the beginning, like and subscribe, share us with your friends and family if you're enjoying this, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Good luck tomorrow, everyone.
Bye.